Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind a beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. It's Friday, so it's an interview. Hopefully you've had 24 hours to get over the fact that apparently I have to do a bit of freelance flower arranging. Apparently it's not right for a bloke to do that sort of thing. It's still too close to the news being released for me to do anything other than let Kieran have his day on this one. How are you, Kieran, since we last spoke, which in Price of Football time was 3 days ago, but in our time was 90 seconds?
Yes, it is. I'm still good. I'm still grinning from ear to ear.
I know. The look of glee on your face, it wouldn't be so bad, but we can see each other now because we're recording on a new platform. A couple of weeks ago, if we were still doing it on Zencaster, I wouldn't have been able to see the look of glee on your face. You're like a pantomime villain. I can almost see you slapping your thigh. Anyway, today we have an interview today, Kieran. Is one of the most interesting. And again, I've said this before to people. I wish it wasn't necessary for them to exist and for us to talk about these issues. We spoke to the chair of Level Playing Field, Tony Taylor, and the development officer, Daniel Townley, about the release on Monday of their annual survey of a great number of disabled fans and their experience on match day, and in particular about how much more money it costs them to go to games than it costs the rest of us. And this is what they had to say. Tony, Daniel, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. I'll start with you, Tony. For those of our listeners that don't know, can you please tell us who Level Playing Field are and what your role is within the organisation?
Okay, well, I'll introduce myself. I'm the chairman of Level Playing Field. We're a registered charity. We've been around for over a quarter of a century, and I think I've been with it for probably about half of that period. Our role is primarily to represent the interests of disabled supporters and spectators and their families and so on. But we also work very closely, not just with the fans, but also with clubs and governing bodies to ensure that accessibility is at the highest level that we could expect. In fact, I always say, wouldn't it be a great world if there was no need for an organisation like Level Playing Field? But sadly, I suspect it's always going to be the case that we're required. So we have that tripod of interests, I guess, in terms of the spectators, football clubs and governing bodies, and we try and work collaboratively, I think, with those organisations to achieve things. And I think we've seen some pretty good progress in recent years, but there's still a long way to go.
We always say, wouldn't it be a great world if we didn't need to have the Price of Football podcast? Sure. But unfortunately, yeah. I think it's going to be a long time before both our organisations are redundant. Yeah. Daniel, before I ask you the next question, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your role within Level Playing Field.
Yeah, sure. Hi. So I've been with Level Playing Field for 4 years now, and I'm the development officer. A lot of my work is working alongside clubs to help improve their accessibility. I do that by delivering disability awareness training and passing on best practice and guidance, and running events and forums where they can sort of learn more, basically. So that's the majority of my role. I also head up on sort of research, so hence coming on today to talk about the survey. Yes,
I understand you're the data guru. I've never actually seen. I've never seen Kieran's ears actually prick up before. But when we heard we had a data guru, he was very pleased.
I get called Carol Vorderman in the office, but it's not a nickname that I've given myself.
That's not a bad nickname. So tell us a little bit, Daniel, about the scope and purpose of your annual fan survey.
Yeah, sure. So We when I joined the organisation, it was quite clear that the sort of the data that we were using, some of it was outdated, some of it was just not accurate or just not exactly what we wanted, and so we were quite purposeful in wanting to set up a year-on-year survey where we could really understand more about disabled fans' experience of attending live sport, find out about the barriers they're experiencing. And then, just to have a kind of a deeper insight into maybe one or two particular areas of that fan experience as well. So most of the questions in the annual survey each year will remain the same. And then each year there's scope for a few of the questions to change slightly. And this year, obviously, we decided to focus on that cost of attending as our kind of primary focus. But yeah, generally the scope of it's grown year on year. So we've sort of started off with, I think, just over 1,000, and now this last survey was closer to 2,000 responses. So it's a huge number of disabled fans who are giving us their feedback.
You mentioned live sport there, Daniel, because we should stress this report is not just about football, is it? Primarily, it's football, but it is other sports as well.
Correct. Yeah. So most of the work that we do is within football, but there are we're increasingly wanting to be involved in other sports as well, and to be able to support other clubs and other fans, obviously make improvements right across sport. Just from the responses, I think about half the responses roughly were Premier League football, and then there was probably about 7 or 8% that were in rugby. And then a few less than 1% in cricket. So yeah, still very much football focused, really. But something that we hope in future we'll be able to work across other sports more as well.
Daniel, the next question I ask to you will be about the financial impact, as you're the data guru. There's no point talking to Tony, it turns out. But I do want to ask Tony something first, if that's all right. Because obviously, Tony, we want to concentrate on the financial aspects of the report. But it was very disappointing to read that the number of disabled fans who say inaccessible public transport stops them attending games has risen, as has the number put off going to games by disability abuse. How is it, Tony, that in 2023 these things are still happening?
Well, let me deal with the latter one. Disability abuse. I don't know how that is still happening. It seems to be something that's on the increase. It's something I've personally experienced over the years, and it's not at all pleasant. There are times when things improve. I remember when we had the Paralympics in London. Everything was great. Everybody was, get on the tube train, people would be standing up and giving you their seat, and people would be helping you up and down stairs and all sorts of things. And that gradually waned after a period. And it seems in the last few years, I don't know whether it's the sort of post-COVID impact or something like that, but it seems to have got a lot worse in the last couple of years from my personal experience, and certainly from people that I talk to at matches. How that can be explained, I'm really not sure, but I think we need to do an awful lot as a society, not just as football or rugby or whatever, but as a society to change that. And it probably starts, with kids at school that need to understand that a disabled person is a human being. We are human beings. We have the same thoughts and feelings that other people have, and it strikes me as crazy that disability abuse is on the rise. I can understand. Let me just put this in context. I can kind of understand. One of the issues I face at football matches is not getting into the stadium or watching the match. It's getting out. I find that the worst time of all. Because you've got so many people just wanting to get away. I can sort of understand that because I come from a background where I was a non-disabled person, and then a car crash put me on the other side of the fence. So I understand the situation from that. But what I can't understand is just this general attitude that disabled people are worthless and we're not going to tolerate them or deal with them, and we're just going to ignore them or bypass them. I find that deeply offensive. Now, in terms of the other question you asked regarding the accessibility of public transport. It's getting worse. We've got a situation with the train strikes, which I guess will have impacted upon that. We're going to have a bigger situation. I think it's probably today's we're having this conversation that they're going to announce the situation regarding ticket offices for train tickets. Now, I'll put it into a real life situation with the train tickets. It is an issue for disabled people. But my personal situation, if I want to get a priority seat, which has got slightly more leg room, which I tell you I need with being somebody who uses crutches, I have to go to the ticket office to get that. That's it. I don't know how that's going to happen once the ticket office is closed, and it's just going to be first come, first served. And whether you need it or not, it'd be nice to have a bit of extra leg room. So I mean that's a problem. But the whole structure of public transport is under pressure, and it's I live in the north of England. At the moment, there's problems with reduced bus services, and there's a strike, I think, in the northeast as well, where people just can't get around. These all impact on disabled supporters when they're trying to make their arrangements. I mean, you try planning ahead, sort of 3 months' time, and when you're disabled and you want to go to a match, it's not okay, I'm going tomorrow. You plan ahead because you have to. I mean, I've got things that I have to organise to make sure that I'm able to get there. And I like to do it sort of 2-3 months ahead. At the moment, you can't do that, and that's a real problem.
I know exactly who I'd blame for everything you've just talked about, but this is not a politics pod. This is not a politics pod, and Guy gets cross when I start going on about the government. You've said something there, Tony, that hasn't occurred to. Again, it's kind of, I feel slightly ashamed sometimes. I read these reports and I think that hasn't occurred to me. That hadn't occurred to me. We interviewed a young blind fan a couple of weeks ago, and so much of what he said was like, that simply hadn't occurred to me. And we talk a lot with great anger about the arbitrary way that the broadcasters rearrange football games, because it's hard enough for all fans to change their arrangements. But of course, I realise now it's even harder for you.
Yeah, well, it is, and for those of us who have to organise personal assistance, if you're having to change that situation right at the last minute, it's crazy. When the actual getting to and from a match is a real headache at times, and if because we're disabled, don't mean we don't work, but everything we do probably takes a little bit longer to organise. So I was talking earlier about I tend to stay in the stadium until the crowds have dispersed before I leave. That probably adds an hour onto my travelling time. If the match is suddenly changed from 3 o'clock till 5 o'clock or whatever, that means it's quite late when I get back. I'm still going to get to work first thing in the morning.
Two things, Tony. May I ask the extent of your disability, and second, who do you support?
Well, I'll do with the easy one first of all. I'm what I guess what you would classify as ambulant disabled. I had a car crash which damaged my spine at my neck, which is quite a serious proposition to deal with. But I managed to walk, but I've been told, I was told 15 years ago that within 5 years I'd be a wheelchair user, but I'm sort of sometime wheelchair user at the moment, but I can feel that deteriorating. So when I go to matches, I use I probably use my wheelchair more than I use crutches, just because I find it a safer way of getting around in large crowds. So that's the easy question. The difficult question is who I support. I from about 1965, I think I saw a guy called Ray Yeoman, who was a bald-headed guy scoring a fantastic header against Luton Town for Darlington. And for many, many, many years, I was a Darlington fan, and it's not a good time to be a Darlington fan, I've got to say. And I was involved with the Supporters Trust at the time of George Reynolds being rather silly with the club, which has left it with more than a few problems. Let's say that. So my supporting at the moment is sort of split between keeping an eye out on Darlington and also watching Middlesbrough, who are just around the corner from me. So, and I live just around the corner from their training ground, so that's quite convenient for me.
I think rather silly is the best euphemism I've heard to describe what George Reynolds got up to.
George Reynolds was a frightening character. I mean, he was regarded as a lovable rogue, but he wasn't. He was. I don't often speak ill of the dead, but he was. He was not the nice character that he was portrayed in the media. He was a difficult character to deal with.
And Daniel, before I come to you, can I check, Daniel? Do you have a disability?
No, I'm not. I'm not disabled.
Okay, right. Let's talk then about the financial impact. I notice it's interesting that you wanted to concentrate in this survey on the financial impact on disabled fans. Just tell us a little bit about what you were told by people who took part in the survey about how much it cost them to get to games. Yeah,
so we asked several questions in regards to the cost of attending, and I guess the main stat that we were asking about was that financial amount for attending for those fans. Sorry, for home fans, there was an additional expense because of disability related factors of £66 for home games, and then for away games that amount was £111. Now that was those who said that there were additional disability related costs to them attending live sports, and obviously those are enormous figures in addition to regular match day costs like ticketing, and the breakdown of that was things like specific accessible travel and parking related costs, maybe costs for a companion or a personal assistant to attend the game with them. That could be in relation to accommodation costs, specific kind of disability-related accommodation, and some other maybe medication or disability-related equipment. So all of these other factors contribute to those overall key figures of £66 for home games and £111 for away, which we knew that there would be additional costs, but we were surprised that they were that high, and obviously that's a huge amount. And is going to significantly hinder many people's ability to go to games on a regular basis. There may be some people listening to this, Daniel. Those figures are over a season, I presume, aren't they? That's match by match. That's match by match? Correct. You're kidding? No. Holy mother, seriously? Oh, my God. What? Oh, wow. Seriously, I genuinely... Because my next question was going to be there may be people who think that over a season... That's not a lot of money, and I was going to say to some people, seriously, I need to learn to read things more accurately because that's incredible. That's match by match. So paying customers, people who are paying to go to a football match, are paying. So Tony's paying £66 more than I am to go to a Middlesbrough game than I'm paying to go to a Palace game. That's terrible. So should just clarify, this is for those who do have additional disability-related costs. So within the survey, there were about 46% of all of the responses said that they did have additional costs. So roughly half of the people in the survey said that they did have additional disability-related costs. And then of those, this was the average. So for half, they said that they didn't, but for the half that did, this was the average of those additional costs. Yeah. Kieran, I want to bring you in here because you're better at righteous anger than I am. It's just wrong, isn't it?
I think there is a broader issue in terms of the way society treats disabled people than just the football industry. And, from what Daniel and Tony have said, many of these costs are not directly linked with the football match itself. It is transport, accommodation, access. And we do appear... certainly from what Tony was saying earlier, we're becoming a less civil society. We're becoming a less tolerant society. There are triggers for that. And again, we're not a political show, but I think we know what those triggers have been in recent years. And I think it's heading in the wrong direction. Certainly with regard, I'm a huge fan of trains, as I think people are aware. And from what Tony was saying, I was at a railway station the other night where there was a young lady who was in tears about something. As a bloke of my age, I feel uncomfortable about approaching somebody. But what was great to see was there was a member of staff from one of the rail organisations who went up, who just said, "How are you doing?" manage to comfort her, take away the distress. And I think the rail network is a great thing in this country historically, and it's a public service. It's not a public cost, and it should be run along those lines, because there are people of certain, so some people aren't able to drive due to disability, some people aren't able to drive due to age, some people aren't able to drive because they don't have cars, and therefore to have a facility which is where people feel safe and people feel that they'll get a decent service is a much broader issue. And there is a culture now in modern day society to take that away, because everything is being viewed through a financial lens. And as somebody who, broadly I understand numbers and finance, I feel increasingly uncomfortable with regards to that.
Can I just add a point in there? That, in terms of the rail network, the provision for disabled passengers, if you look at it, and you read it on a piece of paper, it looks really, really good. However, the reality is a lot different from what you're told you're going to expect. So, for instance, you go to a station that you're told is accessible, and you find that means that there's a bloke with a ramp who's there for your wheelchair. But when you turn up, he's not there, or the ramp's not there, or the ramp's broken, so you can't get on the train. Or you go to a station that's got accessible lifts, and they're out of order. I mean, the number of times I've come across that, it's absolutely ridiculous. Or you go onto a carriage in certain trains, and you can't get your wheelchair into the loo. I mean, come on. We're in the 21st century. These sort of things are just not acceptable at all, and they do impinge on spectators going away to. I mean, are you going to really put yourself through that sort of misery to go and watch a football match? And what we're trying to encourage, particularly at Level Playing Field, is more and more people with disabilities to start going to football, because it brings huge benefits to them, as from a mental health point of view, certainly, but also from a physical health. Just getting out of the house and getting out and about really makes a big difference.
Before I ask the next question I've got written down here, Tony, again, this is one of those interviews where you say things and it just occurs to me I need to ask about them. Can I ask whether you notice a difference in attitudes when you're in your wheelchair than when you're on crutches?
Yeah, I think I do. And the principal thing I notice is that you seem to suddenly become invisible when you're in a wheelchair. When I'm in, I don't know whether it's some psychological thing that it's eyeball to eyeball that people notice you, but you still get this attitude from a lot of people, and I still find it, even in the medical profession, I've got to say, where the does he take sugar sort of attitude when they look up to the person who's pushing your wheelchair or whatever. But certainly at matches, if you're in a big crowd and you're in a wheelchair, I use a power chair, which is a big, heavy piece of equipment. If that runs over you, it hurts. I can tell you from personal experience. But the number of people who walk in front of me, as though I'm not there, and it's absolutely ludicrous. And there's no need for it. I mean, they can see I'm there, but they just seem to assume that because you're there, you're having it comfortable because you're in a wheelchair with a joystick and you're moving around. You're not expiring any energy, so you can brake nice and easy. It doesn't always work like that.
There was an interview with Michael J. Fox, the Back to the Future actor, where he describes being treated as luggage when he uses a wheelchair, and he just compares that experience with when he's not using a wheelchair. Just says it's completely different. People just treat him totally differently.
Daniel, I do have some data questions for you coming up, but if you don't mind, the next two questions are for Tony. For both of you, if you want to join in, of course they are. But as I say, we spoke to a young blind fan a few weeks ago who was brilliant, and with the response to his interview was amazing. But he was particularly agitated, I think is the right word to use, about disability training for match day stewards. And I noticed that features heavily in the survey, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it's important. I think we've seen progress in the last few years. I've got to say, in terms of the provision of training to stewards, it's something that we're actively involved with ourselves. And it used to be the situation, and I think it probably still is in a lot of instances, that disability. Well, we'll leave that to somebody else. But if you want to really understand disability, I mean, you've got to invest some time in it. For instance, I was once at a match taking my crutches. I'm not sure if I mentioned this the last time we spoke, and the steward tried to take the crutches off me because he thought they were a weapon. Or a potential weapon. That's sort of just basic education that people are using crutches for a reason, or that they've got other requirements, especially for So we've got a lot more involvement these days with disability that goes beyond the wheelchair. It's not just wheelchair users. There's so many people with invisible disabilities or hidden disabilities, whatever classification you want to give to it. And unless people are trained to recognize that this is the case, or it might be the case, or the ambulant guy who needs to go through a gate rather than through a turnstile because his limbs won't cope with a turnstile. Stewards need to understand that, and they've got to be trained to understand that if there's going to be progress.
And talking sorry, Daniel, carry on.
No, I was just going to say one of the big issues is just the turnover of staff. So you may have some stewards that are trained, but then actually they're not necessarily working every match, or they may only be in the position short term. So the training is one of those things that just has to be ongoing and has to anybody new that's coming in has to be trained at the very least for a basic level of disability awareness and understanding. Certainly that point that not all disabilities are visible is a massive one.
And talking of stewards, and again, I mentioned before about things that simply don't occur to me as an able-bodied fan, for want of a better word. Stewards, of course, shouldn't be allowing smoke bombs and flares to get into the ground, but it never occurred to me until I read your report about the impact of smoke bombs and flares is greater for disabled fans, is it not, Tony?
Yeah, it is, and it's something that concerns me greatly. We've seen a situation with smoke flares landing very close to disabled supporters in Stadia. I think there was a case up in my part of the world not so very long ago about that. So that there's the incendiary issue, I think, that applies. But there's also people who've got either bronchial issues or other issues, or frankly, if one of those things lands near you, it's not at all pleasant. It amazes me that we still see those flares in use in Stadia, and it seems to be an increasing usage, which does concern me greatly.
Well, in part the problem is we call it at Sellers Park the air search, in that they wave their hands in the general direction of your coat, but they don't get anywhere near finding anything that you've got. Daniel, are there any notable improvements in this year's survey from previous years? Are there any things that your fans are saying are getting better?
Notable is perhaps a key word. There are some stats that did improve. I wouldn't say any of them were sort of significant improvements, but actually some of the barriers that disabled people face did drop slightly. So actually the sort of the key stat of physical access at stadiums being a barrier was actually reduced this year compared to last year. With all of these, there's sort of context, and you have to try and sort of gauge, what are the reasons behind these stats. It's hard to just take 2,000 people and giving you one figure and sort of to draw conclusions from that. It might be, that fewer people are attending games, or for whatever reason, physical access at stadiums, that as a barrier did reduce. Hopefully that's partly due to the work that we're doing at Level Playing Field. The overall, most of the sort of the results were more concerning than they were positive.
You've sort of preempted my next question, Daniel. So I've got three final questions to ask you, and they're sort of linked. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask them together. And Kieran, I'd like you to join in this as well, because there are three things I'd like to know. First of all, how do you use the data you've collected? Secondly, what do you want clubs and transport providers to do now with your outcomes? And finally, have you calculated how much it may cost clubs to provide the level playing field that a whole number of paying customers, and I stress the word paying customers, simply aren't getting? And that's something I'll bring Kieran in as well, how much it would cost clubs. So perhaps, Daniel, if you start with how you'd be using the data question.
Yeah, so with the responses that we've got, we've broken them down club by club and also league by league and passed on that information to specific clubs. So every club that had at least one fan who responded to the survey, we've sent them an individual report of just their responses so that they can look through those. They can draw their conclusions. There's written feedback within each of those as well, so that clubs can see what their fans are saying, and also so they can compare those results with the overall figures to see how they compare against other clubs and nationally speaking as well. We've also done those league by league comparisons and passed those on to the Premier League, the EFL, for them to be able to view. And so, everybody's got a better picture of what's going on in football, of the level of accessibility and what can be improved, really. We will continue to use the results ourselves to inform what we do as a charity. So the areas where there's particular concern, things around public transport, disability abuse, there'll be areas where we will focus our work, particularly over the next sort of 12 months or so. That's the idea of the survey, is to help inform us where we need to be focusing our efforts and energies, really, in engaging fans and making improvements.
I have to say, to the enormous credit of Bristol Rovers, they listened to the interview we had before with our young blind fan, who was reluctant to name individual clubs, but did accidentally reveal that going to Bristol Rovers as an away fan was very difficult for a blind fan. And to their credit, they got in touch within an hour of the podcast interview going out to speak to him about how they could improve the experience, which is what you'd like to hear. But Tony, I'll aim this at you. What if other clubs are listening to this now, or in the unlikely event that transport, the Minister for Transport is listening, what do you want clubs to do in the short term? What's the bare minimum they should be doing in the light of this report?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily just in the light of this report. It's a human rights issue. I think, but we have minimum standards that are laid out in terms of building regulations and in terms of the Equality Act and so on. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done. So let me just put it slightly differently. I think football as an industry as a whole can hold its head up high compared with a lot of other sectors, because it does take the issue of disability seriously. For instance, I take a simple issue with I was at the League Cup final. It was great to see that the EFL had organised for signing of the and the announcements at that match. That's little things like that make such a big step forward. So I think we're not expecting every club to suddenly be 100% accessible, because we understand the finances of it that are involved, and the difficulty we have with disability as a protected characteristic. It's the one protected characteristic that involves capital expenditure to cover it. So we understand that it's not going to happen overnight. At the top end of the game, it should do, because of the resources are there to deal with it. But we know that there's other complications that need to be taken into account of that. So I'm quite pragmatic in that point of view. But what I do want to see is progress. But so take the stadiums themselves. I think we're seeing improvements. There's still a long way to go. But you're right about the other aspects that are more general in terms of society are quite difficult for us to contend with. So in terms of public transport and accessibility, I don't know how we're going to resolve that. It does need a lot to change, and it's probably not going to change very, very quickly, which is a bit disappointing.
My club, Crystal Palace, has a very vocal, very active disabled supporters group. And they're in constant communication with Steve Parrish, and he points out that two sides of the ground are not fit for purpose for able-bodied fans, let alone disabled fans. So, and it's one of the reasons he wants to build the new stand, is to accommodate disabled fans properly. But it's 2023; that should be happening anyway. And what frustrates me, and this is the last question I want to ask, and I want to get Kieran's views on this, is Premier League clubs still talk about cost. It shouldn't matter what the cost is. They're Premier League clubs. But Daniel, are you able to calculate how much it would cost clubs to provide this level playing field?
So my qualified access auditor colleagues would be better people to speak to about the exact costing. But it's worth pointing out that there are several things that are low cost or no cost improvements that can be made for fans. So it's not just, I know obviously there are these big ticket items that are going to be costly, but just things like adding subtitles, on the big screens when you've got videos or when things are being spoken. That's not going to cost anything. It's just considering disabled fans. Things like making your accessible toilets stoma friendly, just adding a hook on the back of the door, a shelf, a bin, a mirror. These things are not huge costs, but can actually make a really big difference for many disabled fans. Yeah, obviously there are those bigger costs, and I don't have a calculation. Obviously, it's going to change from club to club depending on what they already provide, what they already have available to fans. But Tony, I don't know if you've got any better answer than that.
Well, no, it's difficult to say because obviously each ground has got its own particular issues to deal with in terms of construction. But I think an interesting point is that when we see new builds coming along, and even at a fairly advanced stage in the new build, we're still having to give advice to designers and so on about accessibility. You really would have thought that would have been taken into account right at the very start, which is a bit disappointing. But you mentioned Crystal Palace, and I always got a soft spot for Crystal Palace. Your manager is our patron, so I'm always could take a keen eye on that. This argument that we can't do things because it's an old stadium or construction doesn't facilitate this. I've heard it so many times. I've been involved in level playing field for far too many years. I'm sure, and it's always the excuse that I'm given. We were given it by one I'm not going to mention the club. You can probably guess, but we were given that very excuse by a very big, very wealthy Premier League club. And it was only when they were threatened by not us, but by another organisation with legal action. Lo and behold, things suddenly changed, and I talked about being pragmatic. They made sensible, relatively low cost changes that made such a difference, and I'm sure it can be done if there is will. And I understand that it's an expense and it's capital expenditure, and people always look at the balance sheet. However, there is a moral issue that I think is really, really important in this.
Relatively low costs is an interesting one, and I will bring you in a moment, Kieran. Steve Parish, again, to his credit, they converted 2 executive boxes into a quiet, calm space, which has been incredibly successful. And Steve Parish has pointed out, there is a loss of income there from 2 executive boxes, but it's a relatively small loss of income. But the credit gained, if you like, the karma gained, makes up for that. So Kieran, I'd like to bring you in here because I know this is something we've talked about privately. You may have a better indication of how much it would cost a club to just allow access to people who are paying to get in, compared to how much a club is making every year.
I think it's impossible to put a cost on an individual club basis because every set of circumstances is unique. But you've only got to look at Manchester United have just announced an increase in matchday income of £26 million in a single season, to indicate that it can be achieved. And I think from what Tony and Daniel have been saying, it's not a case of lack of budget. It's lack of thought, or disabled fans being an afterthought as opposed to being integrated. Because Tony's circumstances, he's changed following what happened to him. It could happen to any of us, and to take away what is so central to all of us as football fans, and to have such disregard. And I honestly think that football is, certainly from my observation, I was on crutches for a couple of months a few years ago, and I knew what it was like for a few matches to attend, and the challenges that brought. I do think football is probably ahead of many other aspects of society, and we're probably something which we can be broadly proud of. Certainly, I was very proud during COVID of the way that football treated people. But it's a much broader issue, and I think too, we hold football as a lightning rod for so many things these days, which we should be looking at. Whether that's the treatment of disabled people, or whether that's the issues which are rising in terms of racism and so on. That it's increasing concern for me.
Daniel, I keep going to Tony, so I think it's only fair to give the last word to you. I think this is a finance pod, so the data guru should get the last word. Can you just sort of maybe up a couple of the recommendations in the report, maybe some of the ones that are more easy for clubs to do, and just give us a sort of conclusion as to what people listening to this at home can do as well to make life easier for those fans who, as I keep emphasising, are paying a shed load of money to go to a football match.
Yeah, so I think just consideration is the big one, both from the club's perspective and other fans' perspective. Just that understanding that actually attending matches, there may be some differences for disabled fans, and just to kind of be considerate of those different access requirements that different people have. Obviously, in relation to the cost of attending, one of the things that we've said to clubs is just for them to be mindful and aware of that significant additional cost, and making sure that there's nothing that they're doing that's adding to that cost in any way, and where possible to make sure that disabled fans are not having to pay more than they need to. And then obviously, making those changes. I mentioned earlier about some of the simple things that can be done. There's also things like sensory packs, or maybe dementia packs, for fans, things like that actually are not necessarily big expenses, but actually can make a big difference to fans. And the training that we mentioned as well is a massive one. So making sure that all staff within the club have got, at least a baseline understanding of disability awareness, and that they're able to confidently interact with disabled fans, and to make sure that they have what they require on match days. I think for other fans, just being mindful. One of the big issues that we get time and time again is people stood in front of disabled fans, particularly obviously wheelchair users, and them not being able to see the game. So, if you're a fan attending a match, do make sure that you're not stood right at the front of the stand and in people's way. That makes a massive difference. And just being considerate. If fans are using public transport and they need some support, maybe offer support. Just be somebody who's going to be considerate of disabled fans and their requirements. I think that's all from me.
Daniel, this is one of those interviews that keeps every question I ask raises another question. Would you mind telling me what a dementia pack is? Yeah,
so there's a club in the Midlands who launched this initiative, and it's just a pack in a folder with just some helpful things for fans that might have dementia. So maybe reminding them of some of the matches in the past or players from the past. They also had things like having a sticker on that supporter's chair. So if they're a season ticket holder, they can actually put a sticker onto their seat to remind them that that's their seat. So it's got their name and just a prompt so that they can find their seat more easily on a match day. They may have a wristband or a card to say that they're a fan who has dementia, and so they can show that to a steward and receive some additional support. So things like that.
Can I ask what club that is? Because we're quick enough to name and shame on it. This pod. I think we should name and praise as well.
Absolutely. So that was Wolves. Wolves have got a very good disability officer at the club, who is very good at coming up with these initiatives and ideas to help fans. So. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic idea. And what does that cost? $5 for each pack?
Well, I think I think it was largely just sort of printing materials in the office, and I think that disability officer actually funded some of it herself, I think, as well. So yeah, very minimal.
Well, that's brilliant. Congratulations to Wolves, Tony. I can't thank you enough for coming on this morning. Again, it's one of those interviews I wish we didn't have to do, but unfortunately, this time next year there will still be a need for level playing field, and I think there'll still be a need for the price of football. So we'll catch up after the next annual survey, and let's hope that there has been some improvement in between.
Let's hope so. I think there's a long way for us to go to achieve things. A lot of it is down to clubs. A lot of it is down to the governing bodies who are making a good progress. I've got to say, in fairness to them. But there's also the impact of fellow spectators who just need to take that. I think Daniel was talking about the consideration, and I think that really is one of the key things. Just put yourself in our shoes for a moment and just think what it's like for us to have to do, all the problems that we have to deal with in getting there, and a little bit of consideration will go an awful long way to making life more pleasant. And at the end of the day, we're out to encourage more and more people to get involved in attending live sport, and the financial benefits for our industry, if we do see that, are quite incredible. We've got 1 in 4 people in the population are affected by disability in one way or another. So if we can get more and more of those people involved in spectating live sport, we're going to make huge progress.
Mm. Tony, Daniel, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been very, very illuminating. It's not always in a good way, but it's been fascinating to talk to you, and we'll talk to you again this time next year.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed.
Great, thank you.
I think first of all, Kieran, I should probably acknowledge that at some stages during that interview, it sounded like furniture was being moved somewhere and a dog was being kidnapped. So either I need to ask after the royal whereabouts of Finley, or we just put it down to Halloween. So there were 1 or 2 bumps and noises, but it was an interview, Kieran, that as I said several times, I kept saying I didn't realise that the fact, Kieran, that it costs on average a disabled fan £111 more to go to an away game than it would cost you and I. And I assumed that was £111 a year more. And I still thought that was too. These are paying customers, Kieran. That's all. At the end of the day, these people, regardless of the level of their disability, are paying customers at a football game who have bought a ticket or a season ticket, and yet for home games they're paying £60 a week per game to get to more than we are, and for away games £111, Kieran. It's untenable.
It is, and I think it's testament to just how important football is to those people, that they make the sacrifices in terms of other things which they spend their money on, such as their love for the club and the joy that it brings being able to watch. A lot of those costs are external to the football club itself, but you do wonder if football clubs could make a bit more effort, to acknowledge the challenges faced by disabled fans in terms of pricing. And also, I think what was disturbing was we as football fans, we need to be doing more as well, because you're not invisible. You shouldn't be invisible if you're in a wheelchair, and you should be treated with more respect in terms of just giving people a bit of space and treating them as equals, because they are equals.
Well, it's not even more respect, Kieran, is it? It's the same respect, and the fact that they're reporting that disabled people are not going to football matches because disabled abuse is increasing is just it beggars belief. And as both Tony, who is himself disabled, pointed out, and Daniel, the mental health benefits for disabled fans going to football are huge. So those should be acknowledged as well. It shouldn't happen that they're having to pay more money. And off air, Daniel Townley told us that Scope, disabled charity, have calculated that for the average family with a disabled person in a house, their household bills are £970 a month more than the rest of us. And again, these are facts that you and I try to be as kind and as helpful as we can. But these are all figures that I had no idea about, Kieran, and they should be made public. And hats off to Level Playing Field for doing so.
Yes, yeah, it was an education listening to Tony and Daniel, and thanks very much for coming on the show. We learned a lot, and I hope our audience appreciate it. And I'm biased. I think our listeners are great.
I agree.
And if there's anything more that can be done, because certainly we've seen when Jamie, the blind fan, came on. There were clubs. Club or two reached out, and hopefully clubs can perhaps have a rethink. Doing the simple things. And by the way, Wolverhampton Wanderers. Oh, hats off! You should be really proud, Wolves fans.
Yeah, and generally, Wolves fans listening to this, and I hope people at the club are. But if they're not, Wolves fans listening to this, please contact your club and tell them what a brilliant idea that dementia pack is. It's a brilliant idea. And like we said on the podcast, what's that going to cost? £5 a time, if that, to make a world of difference to the fan with dementia and also the people that are with that fan with dementia. I think that's a cracking idea. I really do. So it's really good to end that interview on a positive note and encourage other clubs to do as many things like that as can be done to make, well, just to get that level playing field going. So thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to join them and make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you. And it also gets you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And if you want to be a Price of Football Ultra, it only costs you £5 a month. So you can do that by going to patreon.com/Price of Football. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And priceoffootball.com is where you need to go if you want to snap up one of the few tickets left for our live show at the Royal Yacht on Jersey this coming Tuesday, November the 7th. You can also get our book, Unfit and Improper Persons, at the website and at all good bookshops. And go to that website if you want to buy one of our other books or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt. Bye now.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.